Tom Davidoff described Vancouver as a beautiful city, created by nature and ruined by man. He, of course, was talking about his pet project, the cost of housing. Our guest today says that's just the tip of the iceberg. Abeer Yusuf, like so many before her, came to Vancouver, gasped at the natural beauty, and determined this was going to be a great place to call home. That is, until she started living here. Soon, she discovered what so many before her have found out about Vancouver's fickle nature. You want to love the city, and at the same time, it does just about everything to make you scratch your head and wonder what you saw in the place when you fell in love with it. You want to stay, you want to leave, you're torn in both directions. Housing, yes, but so too transportation, the cost of food, clothing. Yes, there are jobs, but career opportunities are hard to come by, and so too are friends who can keep a date. As Abeer Yusuf has experienced, people are super flaky here. On a dime, and at the last minute, they will cancel their date with you. A true Vancouver problem that predates Abeer's arrival by decades. Are we truly multicultural, or do we spend too much time congratulating ourselves about inclusivity and then come up short when it comes to creating integrated communities? We invited Abeer Yusuf to join us for a conversation that matters about the myriad challenges of feeling truly at home in Vancouver.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program for the Centre for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You know, you and I met at an event that was titled basically, Why Stay in Vancouver? Or I'm going to stay in Vancouver, or I'm not going to stay in Vancouver. And I go to that thinking, well, everybody wants to stay in Vancouver. And then I meet you and you're like, well, yes, but no. And what is it that makes you uncertain about whether or not Vancouver is the place that you want to continue to call home?
I think there's a lot of pieces around social isolation. How community is built or not built over here, or I should say the lack of community here. One thing that is definitely on my mind is seeing the rise of intolerance and more sort of right-wing thought that makes me very uncomfortable as a woman of color and as someone who's Muslim. Because if I wanted to bring my parents over here, there are a lot of considerations I'd have to have about their safety to really analyze whether or not I want this to be my future and if I want to live here. Plus, I feel like people here move in silos. There isn't the piece around community building and reaching out to people who aren't like you is very weak here.
Why do you think that is? Like, what is it that has been part of your experience that makes you say, gosh, it's hard to reach across and meet someone else?
People are super flaky here. You can reach out to people, you can tell them, hey, let's go for brunch, let's go for coffee and stuff. And 2 seconds before you're about to go meet them, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I have this going on right now. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, maybe I'll pop by. And it's a really frustrating experience when you're trying really hard to make those connections and have one-on-one personal, when you're trying to create that personal connection, essentially. One thing that I find hugely problematic about Vancouver is that people try to overschedule their lives. So if I want to hang out with you, I can't text you a day before or 2 days before. I need to get in touch with you 2 weeks in advance. I want to hang out with you tomorrow, not 2 weeks from now. By 2 weeks after that, I'm probably going to be like thinking to myself, like, oh, I don't really feel like meeting you today, or maybe I'm not feeling so well today. So inevitably people flake. But I think that a huge problem is the fact that people overschedule their lives here.
And you see this is a Vancouver thing, because I'll admit it drives me crazy when somebody at the last minute goes, oh, something's come up and I can't do it. Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, hang on a second, I've set aside this time.
Exactly.
Are you telling me that my time is worth nothing? It's not even worth your consideration?
This happened to me last week with 3 different people who canceled on me right when we were about to meet and were constantly rescheduling on me. But because I was sort of like, yeah, I want to see you, you're leaving town, or whatever it is, I was just constantly like, yeah, sure, whatever works for you works for me. But it turns out that, no matter how much you do, sometimes it's not enough.
Okay, so, you talked about community. When you talk about community, are you talking about in different communities? And I want to come back to this bit about like, would you say that there are members of a particular kind of this sort of Canadian or that sort of Canadian? And I don't like that kind of designation, but, it exists and, it's real. Do these things happen within, like, sort of the culture of the city as a whole, or do they happen within specific cultures within the city?
I think they happen within the city, but then they become the culture of the city. So you start off and you don't recognize, you're just like, oh, if this person does this, then tomorrow I can flake on this person, and oh, I'll just let this person know and stuff. But slowly that just becomes like a vicious cycle that doesn't stop, because we don't seem to be able to step back and say, okay, I need to build community and I need to be able to build connections. And that's kind of where it's rather weak.
I got to get you to hang on for a second while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Sorry for the interruption, but I need your help. I'm asking you to support the show by becoming a patron. That means pledging $1 per show. Conversations is a unique program. There's no grandstanding, no arguing, no yelling. Instead, I sit down with people who have unique insights, specialized knowledge, and experiences that inform and enlighten. And we do this on an incredibly limited budget with a very small crew. Well, this is my office, and it's where I edit the show. And then once it's ready, we give it away. You know, so many different websites around the world are carrying the show, but they get it for free. They don't pay us. So I'm asking you to pledge $1 per show by going to patreon.com/conversations that matter. Thanks. We want to keep producing conversations, and with your help, we can. Now let's get back to the show. Is that enough of a reason for you to sort of go, I'm not so hot on Vancouver? There must be other things or other elements of this city that make you become uncertain. And I know that you touched on that a little bit in your sort of opening remarks about, okay, is this a safe place for me to bring my parents?
Yeah.
What makes you uncertain that it is a safe place?
Just the rise of like Islamophobic attacks, contents, and the fact that there's a lot of, Canada always likes to pride itself against America and say, well, this doesn't happen here and we're not racist like they are in America. Yet there's a pervasive thought that happens in Canada as well. It's more institutionalized, and it's more hiding behind closed doors, and it's hiding behind people's mindsets. So we don't get to see it. It's not as obvious or in your face, which I don't know that I should be thankful for the fact that it's not so in your face. Because now I go back home and I'm doubting myself, and I'm going, well, was this person mean to me because they were mean, or were they racist, or were they xenophobic to some degree or extent? And that's a very difficult line to live in between, because you're constantly in this pressure of, well, maybe this person said this because I'm not from here, but maybe that doesn't mean that that's racist. Maybe that's just because they said that. It's very hard to deal with that, because you can keep going back and forth in circles, because you also don't want to put the label of someone being racist when you can't thoroughly verify. But if you don't say it out loud, how do I know whether or not that was racist? Or
Well, I had a guest on the show, a woman by the name of Mafalda Arias, a couple of years ago. She's originally from Peru, and her specialty is cultural integration. And she said one of the biggest challenges facing Canada is that we're afraid to speak up and say, gosh, the color of your skin is different than the color of my skin. The way that you do this, why do you do it that way? But rather than why do you do it that way? And so we're afraid to reach across those barriers because we think that somehow it's impolite or it's not a Canadian thing to do. She said, and as a result, we wind up in situations where there's no exchange of ideas. One culture doesn't get to know the other one because you're not asking, well, how come you do it that way? Oh, I see. And when there's a willingness to be open and to try and understand, you can start to figure these things out. So I can understand the confusion, which makes it difficult. But then we look across the border and we go, yeah, but the way that it is in the United States looks far more openly hostile than it is here. Wouldn't that be more difficult to deal with than what you're describing?
At least that way I know who my enemies are, and at least that way I know where I can go and where I cannot go. But here, if I'm just sitting back you know, in a conversation with you, or like I'm sitting in an office and I'm just wondering and doubting myself, you know, like you internally oppress yourself and you internally start gaslighting because you're just like, what was that? Was that, should I perceive that slight to be more than just someone having a bad day? Or is this someone's perception or mindset of me? And I think that's where we get lost. Certainly we're polite. Certainly we don't want to be caught, especially now when we're so politically correct and we need to be. Canadians want to stick to the rules and don't want to be perceived as people occurring outside the object, right? You want to color within the lines.
Yeah.
But I think that what happens is that I think we all need to be a bit more brave and resilient and understand that we're going to make mistakes and that we all need to make mistakes. Because if we don't talk openly or if we don't have dialogue, that doesn't predicate itself on the basis of being about like, look, I don't know anything. I'm openly ignorant about these things. I would love to learn. I'm not sure where to start. Can you point me to the right direction? And just a simple acknowledgement of like, you know, I understand that you're a person of color. I'm a white person. Like, you know, I understand that this might be some level of emotional labor for you, but I would really appreciate if you could just point me in the right direction of things. So I think that there's some work that we need to do as, say, for example, in the race conversation around people of color, but there also needs to be an observation and a recognition and acknowledgement from white people that, you know what, these people are probably going through these same conversations 7 times in a day. I'll give you a quick example. Yesterday was Eid for me, which is a religious holiday and an observance that we have. Nobody in Canada or nobody in Vancouver knows what that is, and people
Right, I'm not familiar with it.
And that's fine. But when I used to be in more of a professional context where I'd work with people, I would have to answer questions about what Eid is 7 or 8 times a day. And you see what that does to me is that it frustrates me at the end of the day when the 9th person comes up to talk to me and say, hey, what's Eid? I'm not sure. Oh, is this your, like, you know, is this your cultural holiday? So it's what we call death by 1,000 cuts, right? Because there's this invisibilizing of our reality, of our culture, of our, you know, all of these things. Justin Trudeau, his father, a lot of Canada's policies around multiculturalism have often caused now Canadians to pride on multiculturalism and look at all the food diversity we have and everything. But it's not diversity until you don't even recognize or don't have basic knowledge of what other people observe in other parts of the world, or whether it's religion, whether it's you know, culture, whether it's holidays, whether it's whatever it is. So how can we claim that we're a multicultural country when this country only gives you holidays for Christmas, Easter, Good Friday? There's nothing for Diwali. Where's Eid? Where's you know, Chinese New Year? Where's Thaipusam? Where are all of these holidays and observances that exist for so many cultures? But comparatively, you look at India and Malaysia, both places that I'm from, we get holidays for each and every one of those days.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Eid is like, we in India, we actually get a holiday for the Prophet's birth as well, which is a fairly big deal and stuff. So we get a holiday for the Prophet's birth, we get a holiday for Eid al-Adha, which just happened, and then the bigger Eid, which is the Ramzan Eid, I suppose.
I like what you said, you know, that, I'm going to strive to understand, and then I'm not going to make it an issue. It just becomes a part of the interaction between people.
Yeah.
So when you first came to Vancouver, what did the city hold as far as promise was concerned for you?
Oh, my parents were so excited because they saw that when they walk on the road, people stop their cars and let you cross, and they even wave at you. My parents were delighted with that.
Yes.
Obviously, the natural geography, the landscape of this place, the greenery and everything. I come from Malaysia, which is also a lush forest, and we have a lot of greenery that lives with concrete, so both types of jungles. And so I was very excited for like the fact that I got to see mountains and the sea and the ocean. So a lot of Vancouver is amazing just because of where it is and where it's situated, right? But as I recently had a conversation with a friend who said that I wish I could live in Vancouver, but with Toronto's people.
Why? What is it about Toronto that makes you go, those sensibilities I find more appealing?
Well, I haven't been to Toronto, so I'm not sure. I want to find out what it is, but I think that there's perhaps an easier sense of diversity, and there's not a constant having to be othered.
So how does that play itself out when seeking employment? Because we all have to make a living. How do you find economic opportunities in Vancouver as far as workers concerned?
So that's a really interesting question, because I recently hosted a dialogue series around inclusion and diversity in the workplace, and what some solutions are that we, with our intersectional identities, face when it comes to getting employment or while we are employed. And a couple of people brought up the fact that they were finding that they were not getting interviews or even being called back because their names sounded foreign, which means that they didn't sound white enough. Now, that was a conversation that rippled through, and that was, and someone shared that then I just changed my name to a more whiter sounding name. So like Jagdeep becomes Jaggy or whatever it is.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I'm thinking, okay, Abeer, you could call yourself Abby.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd probably get so much more, Abeer, I could call myself Abby Joseph because my surname is Yusuf, which is Joseph, and it's a biblical or Abrahamic name. So yeah, and a lot of people shared that this one particular individual shared that she had gone for multiple rounds of interviews and applied for multiple jobs and stuff, did not get a single call back for any of them. But the moment she changed her name, she got a job like that. And sometimes it's also about the color of your skin, right? You go in and up until they're communicating with you, they're kind of going like, okay, well, we're not really sure if we want this person or not. But the moment they see you, there's an automatic like, oh, this person's far too different or foreign, or will they be able to fit in here?
Right.
And I don't want to say that those are the only barriers to employment. There's a lot around. There's a particular vocabulary you have to use here. You have to put a resume in. You have to put a cover letter in. As I'm finding out, the cover letter can't be more than 2 pages long. The resume should be like this or shouldn't be like that. There's a lot of rules that if you don't know what those rules are, and you don't know who's going to sit and explain those rules to you, right? You just don't know how to proceed. And this other issue that I think plagues a lot of work in Vancouver is the fact that people only want to hire people who they know. It's an environment where who you know matters more than what you know at times. And fair enough from an employer point of view, because if you come recommended to me from someone I know that I can trust you, and that there's an implicit understanding that we have of maybe this person has similar values as I do. Sometimes there's the idea that, okay, if this person is coming from a recommendation via Stuart, then I know that I won't have to train this person as much, and it's not going to be so difficult for me to work with. That's great when you're the employer, and that's a very real that's a very real issue, because we're bound by so much work. We're all being overworked, overstressed, underpaid. We want to be able to accrue the maximum amount of productivity from the people that we work with the minimum amount of work that we can do, because we're already saddled with so much. But what happens on the employee side is, what do I do when I'm brand new, fresh to the city, want to make an impression, want to work hard, will go above and beyond the call, but I just don't know the right people.
As you're explaining all of this, and I go, yeah, good point. And then there's a part of in the back of my head that goes, I can hear somebody talking at the screen going, but that's your responsibility to learn how to fit in. What do you say to that? Because if we've invited people from around the world to come here, and then to turn around and say, oh, but now you have to do all the work. Is that fair? And then what becomes our responsibility to help you feel as though you're a part of the whole, and that you can participate?
Perfect. So first of all, it's being open to people and acknowledging that knowledge comes in different forms and ways, right? It's not just always via degree or via some formal education or formal work that you've done. So many of us do so many things that aren't maybe categorized in the form of a literature review or a thesis or whatever it is. So it's valuing the fact that people have knowledge that they're bringing with them, but that may not be categorized, because I think that there's this love for some kind of quantity, like how do I quantify this? And immediately your brain starts working. So first of all, it's understanding and acknowledging that knowledge comes in different forms. Lived experiences matter a lot, oral histories and what people go through. People have capacity to deal with a lot of different things. Recognizing that resilience is a thing, which I don't think we do. a lot of these practices can't just change on a human to human level. They need to change at an institutional level. And we need diverse people there making that change that can see that there is an institutional change to then let it be trickling down to the ordinary daily person-to-person interactions.
And then there's housing, the cost of housing. Is that enough to make you say there's got to be somewhere else that's more affordable?
Of course. Like, I don't know a single person who's not struggling. I don't know a single person who's not cutting corners in one way or another, from my generation at least. It's really difficult. And you have to, I recently met a young migrant youth who works at a Subway in Tawasin and lives in Delta, or Surrey, I think. And they have to transit between those two places every day. And they study in Vancouver, in East Vancouver specifically. So this is a person that's come from India who's trying to make it in Canada, who's working hard. They've been told that education is the way to do that, so they're taking a degree certificate course at a college here. They're hoping to use that to then get a better job, but until then, they need to have a way to pay the bills because it costs a lot of money to get here. The cost of living here is expensive in and of itself. Then you have to also somehow figure out what your next piece is going to be. No wonder that ambition is stopped at Subway or at driving a taxi, because you need to do whatever you can to pay the bills. The other part of your brain that's thinking, okay, well, what can I do, or what do I want to be, doesn't kick in until you're in your late 40s or early 50s. So that's a huge issue.
Mm-hmm. And still, here you are in Vancouver, and it's a love-hate kind of relationship, and you're not sure whether or not you want to stay or want to go.
Yeah.
What's going to tip the balance for you? Because I want you to stay.
Okay, thank you.
Well, because it's clear to me that you're an intelligent, hardworking individual who will be an amazing contributor to the society that I call home, and I want you to call home. So what's it going to take for you to say, okay?
First of all, very gracious of you to say all those kind words. It'll take good employment. And I think not just for me, but for people like me, being paid fair wages. We're entering a time in our lives where the gig economy is what we're proceeding into. Every other month, the government very proudly announces that they've added this many jobs and that many jobs. What constitutes a job? And like finding our ways out of that system and tricking the employees that you have, because you're just going like, oh, I can just get this on contract work or spec work, or I can just hire this person for a gig. That's great for you in terms of cutting a cost and you being the institution. But think about what that does to your labor market, and think about how that burns that labor market out. Do good work. I'm hardworking, I'm honest, I'm sincere, yet I'm finding that the institutions or the big companies want to cut their way and want to keep the earnings as much as they can at the top without like spreading the wealth. It's that famous quote, when you have more money, don't build a longer table, not a higher wall.
Well, I wish you all the best, and I hope that everything works out for you to be able to stay here. Thank you for coming in and sharing your perspective on the livability of Vancouver.
Thank you.